an assistant principal at the high school, the guy that was the principal would come in and tell us to do this or to do that, and then he'd leave. Never done this before, didn't know what it was. So I would go to the girl that was the counselor and I would say, Sydney, tell me what I'm supposed to do here. And she would tell me and I'd say, why didn't he tell me that? And she's like, you're just supposed to know. I felt like that last song that we just sang, like those words are out of order. You're just supposed to know there, you know? So if you were reading that for the first time, I thought about Maria right there. So I don't know if Maria knows this song, and she definitely ain't gonna know it when we're singing the words out of order on it right there. So yeah. There are two, and I'm pretty sure every time I put them on there, I pick the wrong one. So that kind of makes it difficult as well. Be turning to the book of Joshua, chapter 6. That's where we're going to be working from tonight. Actually, technically, the very end of Joshua chapter 5, and then into Joshua chapter 6. So we're going to talk about, as you can see here, on the board, the screen here, the life in the promised land. We're going to talk about the conquest of Jericho. But before we get into it, I'm going to ask you the question here. And Lucille, you're not allowed to say Crab Orchard as the answer, okay? What is the biggest city that you have visited? All right, so that's why you couldn't say it, Lucille. I didn't want you throwing that one out. But think about the biggest city that you've ever been to. Anybody got one that you can think of? Will? Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Rome, Italy. If we've been outside of the country, Rome's one of the bigger ones. Los Angeles. Well, I remember when Mary went to, Mary went to Los Angeles several years ago, but Mom and Dad went to Los Angeles, and they landed at the airport and they were leaving Los Angeles. Dad said, we've been driving for 2 hours and we've not left it at all. So what did you say, Melvina? Did you say Danville? All right. So it's a growing city there. So most of us would pretty easily come up with some big cities that perhaps we've been to. But I joke just now to Lucille about not saying Crab Orchard. But this summer, me and Will and Mom and Dad went on a driving tour of Crab Orchard. Now, bear with me. I think I told you, but bear with me. We went down every street within the city, and Mom told me who used to live there or what the house that was like used to live there. And I thought there were streets, and I kid you not, my grandmother lives in, well, I can't say downtown because Mom would fuss, but she lives in suburban Crab Orchard, right down the street just a little bit. I've been there all the time for 40-some years. There were streets that I had never noticed. And the more we drove, I thought, when Mom said, well, she was going to take us on this little tour, my first thought was, well, we could just walk. But after we drove, I thought, boy, that would have been a lot of walking because we probably rode around for 3 hours and never left town. Now, afterwards, we went to Broughton Town. That's where it got real big. But in the small town, it's sort of seen right there. But would it be realistic in your mind to walk all the way around the city limits of, say, Lancaster or Stanford or Crab Orchard tomorrow? Could you do it? You could, but it would take a while, right? Now, we've all agreed those are kind of small cities. What about that level of city that you just mentioned? Los Angeles, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Rome. Would that be realistic to walk around? Be really difficult, right? It's a big city. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is walking around a city. And for most of us, driving around Crab Orchard made more sense than walking. But in a city like Chicago or New York, it might be better to drive or ride a bus. They even have subways and forms of public transportation to get you somewhere quicker. But the story we're going to talk about tonight will include that lap around the city. And I say that because Jericho was a big city. Jericho was not the Crab Orchard of its day, but was maybe a little closer to the New York or Chicago of its day. So I want us to think about that here as we tell the story. First of all, though, there's a couple of things that we need to consider, and only because I don't want to go back and read the whole story from earlier. But Jericho will be the first major obstacle in Israel's conquest of the promised land. We've told this before, I've said this before, but my sort of mental image of the children of Israel is that once they get to the promised land, the doors are open and it's all right there. But that's not realistic. People were there, the people are really almost everywhere. And so when you get there, what's theoretically yours, and there's somebody already there, that could be a problem. And so this is the first major obstacle. In Joshua chapter 2, and you can turn back and read it later if you want, but they were camping opposite Jericho and they're ready to cross the river. And Joshua sends in 2 spies to Jericho where they stayed in the house of Rahab, who was a prostitute. Tom read about that just a few minutes ago. And the king of Jericho, who gets wind of this, sent soldiers who'd asked Rahab to bring out the spies, but instead, you may remember that she hid them. And so after they escaped, the spies promised to spare Rahab and her family after taking the city. Remember what she had to do to sort of what did she have to do to make it known where she was? Had the red cord sort of hanging out. Some parallels to the Passover here as well. But that probably tells you a lot about the size of the city, that this place was so big that we're not going to know, like if you drive to, Crab Orchard, mom could say, well, it was this house and this house, who lived here and who lived there. But this was a fairly large city, of course. And so I think what we'll see is what you see there at the end, that God's victories are not necessarily always won by human strength, but through obedience and through trust. And I think that's important for us to consider as we go forward. Okay, so let's talk for just a little bit here about this story. We're going to start in Joshua chapter 5, and these are the last 3 verses of Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. Mary, would you care to read these for us, please? Judges chapter 5, verse 13, maybe a little different. All right. So this leads us into the battle, but I want to talk a bit here about what we're seeing. First of all, why is it important here for Joshua to meet the commander before the battle begins? And I think you'll notice here that the word commander is a capital C in the reading. Why would it be? Well, first of all, who's he talking to here? And second of all, why was this important? He is. Okay. Any others? He's talking to, do you think it's firmly, personally Jesus?
I do, because what he says next, take off your ground from your feet, shoes when you're standing on holy ground. The only other time we see that is in the burning bush. God,
that's what I'm saying. God, I don't necessarily know if it's Jesus or not.
I think we see throughout the Old Testament different things, but I think it is. I have proof of that now.
Okay. But I do think we do see with a capital C that he's clearly some kind of part of the Trinity, for lack of a better word. So let's think about them for a second. Just strip away the biblical part of it. Why would it be important to meet the commander in a military sense before the battle begins? Got to have a plan, right? Got to have a plan. who's leading the way. Yeah, that's true. So this plan, this idea here, this commander reminding them that the battle, I guess, God is in control of it right there, not Israel's might. And that's fairly important, right? Because we sometimes think we're pretty strong, right? I can handle this, and maybe it's not. I thought it was interesting that the question that Joshua asked was, are you for us or for our adversaries? We're going to come back to that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. But what does this encounter maybe teach us about approaching challenges with humility?
I can do nothing by myself on my own. I'm weak and feeble at best. But with God, there's nothing I can't accomplish.
It's easy to say that, right? But sometimes we want to put it on ourselves, right? I can handle this. Here's it were. And so Joshua is clearly a powerful military leader. Maybe there's nobody better that you would want than Joshua leading this charge, right? But even Joshua, the most powerful leader, the leader of this army, has to submit to what the will of God was there, right? And so if the most powerful, I would not put myself in that group, and you probably wouldn't put yourself in that group either, then if he did it, then maybe we do as well. Mary. Yes. Absolutely.
And I think that's another thing that kind of makes me want to believe that this is Jesus. Anytime you see men fall to their faces before angels, they tell them to get up. And here, we don't, don't worship me or get up here. We don't see that.
Yeah.
Accept the worship.
If
I think that, yes. I think God comes in human form different ways. When he wrestled with Jacob, the burning bush, different things. I think when God comes to earth, he sends Jesus. Same way when he went down to visit Sodom and Gomorrah. I think that was Jesus and angels that come through there.
Question, and honestly, the biggest reason why I started in chapter 5 is I wanted to get to this question. And if you'll notice in verse 13, Joshua said to him, he said, are you for us or for our adversaries? Essentially, pick one, right? Do you like this team or that team? Which one do you like? But if you'll notice verse 14, it says no. And I like this here because I think it's important for us to note that God is not on an our side, their side kind of thing. And pretty much everything in life has become this binary, our side kind of thing. God loves Kentucky, so that means he hates Indiana. God loves political party A, that means he hates political party B. And so we split the divide this. That's not the way that God answers it, but that's how we do it. Because it is much easier for me to ask you, do you like one thing or another? And you got to give me one answer or not, right? But in reality, we're the one that's putting God on the side. Verse 14, he said, no, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Okay? What I see for us today, Joshua then to be on his side. There's not an our or their side. It's to be on his side. And so when I view that as I need to do what God asks of me. Because most groupings are probably not fair. There's a lot of gray in the middle, right? There's a million court cases that have been had, and it's like, well, is he guilty? I don't know. Is he not guilty? Well, I don't know. It's probably somewhere in the middle because it's hard for us to know. But we want to group it in one or the other. Mary? Right. Right. Well, it's hard for us to be right about most anything because we don't have all the information, right? That could be the same, but God does. So and I wanted to get to that question just because how many battles do you think people have went into and said, I know we're going to win because God is on our side? I would imagine that the U.S. D-Day invasion force, well, Eisenhower said as much that God was on their side. But I'd say the German commander probably said the same thing. You're going to win because God's, well, which one is it, right? Well, it's whoever's staking the claim. But we have to be careful with that. We have to seek our answer here through God. So I wanted to hit on that to start with. And now we're going to go into the actual battle. I will say we're going to read chapter 6, verses 1, I think all the way down through, I believe it's through 27. But there, it does sort of repeat itself in the first part and then the second part. So if you hear it being said a second time, you're like, wait, did we already read that? Well, there is a bit of repetition to it. Boo, do you care to read? This is 1 through 11. It's a little bit longer and there's a couple more slides. Okay. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I wanted to read all of that here to start with. And then I want to get an answer from you. This is the first time you have ever heard this story. In fact, this is the first time you have ever been in a church setting at all. That's the role you've got to play right here. Does this seem like a strange plan for conquering a city? Yes, right? There are some things that are noticeably absent in this plan. But if you look at verse 1, it says, now Jericho was securely what? Was securely shut. And so that's to start with, right? You know, what you're probably going to do is you're going to look around and you're going to say, where are there some openings? Where are they weak? Maybe can we undermine, you know, the fort or the city walls or whatever? We're going to look for that, but it's securely shut up. And so the plan says that they have to do what? March around the city. So we're going to do that today. And then it's all going to fall. Everything's great, right? What was the plan? You got to do it tomorrow. We'll do it again. And we'll do it again. 6 days, right? And then on the 7th day, we'll do what? 7 times, which seems like a lot. Seems repetitive. And then what? Blow the trumpet and shout. All right. So by any measure, this is a strange plan, right? This plan will require a lot of what? This is a faith-based plan if there ever was one, right? This would absolutely require faith. So I want you to think about this second question, because we'll come back to the actual conquering here in a minute. But what do you think this reveals about trusting God, even when maybe the commands don't make sense? It'll find a way. Right? God's plan here seems illogical to who? To us, right? Seems illogical to us. Mary. Uh-huh. Yeah, we're actually going to talk about that here in just a second. But you're exactly right. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this plan doesn't seem to pass. Well, bottom line, if you took this plan to a U.S. Army commander today, they'd probably say, usher this fella on out. We'll talk to somebody else, and put this person in a home, maybe. So what maybe we would say. And so we today have to go by faith on these things as well, because sometimes we've talked about this plenty of times, but when we asking for this or that, right? But we really want it done in whose way? Kind of want it our way. Now, and I asked for this, and it'd be nice to get it by tomorrow, and that's how we want. But sometimes it doesn't happen that way, right? We ask for patience, and we don't get patience, we get tested, right? Well, that doesn't seem right. I should get patience. What are we actually getting? We're getting a chance to demonstrate whether we have developed our patience here or there. And so the way that it comes, we might look back at that and say, well, that seems odd. But sometimes it's easier, or that's the right word. Sometimes we're better off having gone through the challenge rather than through the easy part. Now, I want you to look at this. Mary already kind of addressed it, and I don't think she's actually looked at the stuff, but maybe she did. She'd already skipped ahead and read. But how does God ask us to demonstrate faith in ways that maybe challenge our logic? How so? Okay. All right. Okay.
And just believing in Jesus and that itself, the biggest problem that Islam had with Jesus is they said it's impossible that God would allow his son to die in such a horrible way. So therefore, he couldn't be the son of God. He had to just be a cross.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes
I get that. Mm-hmm.
And it is hard to believe that. You've got to walk by faith, not by sight.
Ben talked earlier, we were talking about who was it that spoke to Joshua. Well, Christianity teaches that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are separate, but also equal, right? That seems that's hard for humans to grasp, right? Christianity teaches that Jesus died and was resurrected. Who that's been resurrected? Everybody that that has died has stayed dead, haven't they? Christianity teaches, Jesus taught for you to be baptized, right? And by going into water and then coming back out, your sins would be forgiven. That's a complicated thing to sort of grasp. And I say that because we look at these things from sort of a personal view. And so a friend of mine who taught world history for years with me, he would always talk about how Christianity is really difficult to grasp in some ways. But that's what faith is. Faith is not doubt. It's not the opposite of doubt. It's sort of the opposite of certainty. And when you think about what faith is, the reason you have faith is because you are uncertain. Okay? I might be uncertain about all these things that we talked about, but my faith is strong enough to hopefully overcome the challenge there is, because it is by its definition things that we've not seen or experienced. And so we're asked, as we talked about last week, when they stepped out into that rushing river, what did they have to have? They had to have faith right there. And so there's a lot of requests of faith for us, and it is a challenge for us. And I've said that many times right up here. It would be great to talk to somebody who's already dead that can tell us all about it. We don't have that person, right? We don't get that person. And so it is requires us to have faith. Well, no different than this, which required Joshua to have faith. Had you been Joshua, would your faith have been strong enough to say, all right, boys and girls, we're going to load up and walk around this town at once a day quietly? Been hard.
Not only faith to do it, but then faith to tell everybody else that,
Yeah.
as a leader, this is my game.
Right. That's true. It might not have been Joshua's faith that was as important as the people that were walking with Joshua to do that as well. All right. So let's go take a march around. I thought about having all of us walk around the inside of the building here tonight. But I didn't know if y'all wanted to do that. Some of y'all might just walk on out if we did that. I got to keep you tied down. Joshua chapter 6, verses 12 through 19. Sue Ann, do you care to read this one? Bless you. All right, so I actually want to go back here to this first thing, because if we look at this first slide here, this is day one, right? And everybody's first day of doing something is always enjoyable, right? First day at the job, love it. First day of this or that, this is wonderful, right? And so they did it on this first day. And remember, Ben said a minute ago, Joshua presents this plan, right? So we got to have all the army on board with it right here. What can we learn from Israel's repeated obedience, even when, let's be honest, we get to like day 3 and day 4 and day 5 and ain't nothing happened?
Okay. One of the things that people know he ain't coming yet, the warrior world ain't coming yet, it ain't coming yet. Food is still alive. It's just going to keep on going, and they lost the focus. I think the same with us. Now we're, more than 2,000 years removed, well, Jesus isn't coming. It's easy to take your eye off.
Sure. Right. So this is not a question that's on the screen, but I want to ask it because I've got it written down here. How does unity boost obedience and faith? And unity requires multiple people. It can't be unity of one, because that you don't need that. But how does unity boost obedience and faith? Absolutely. Others? Right. Right. Yeah.
It's like worship. We can come to this building by ourselves and worship God by ourselves.
Right.
But it's much more meaningful and much more easy to do and look forward to when it's you.
Right.
You got everybody doing it with you, everybody lifting up one another and encouraging.
Absolutely. And so I think what we see here is that same kind of thing with them, you know. I'm sure that as they were thinking about this plan, there were probably it's probably a continuum of who thought good or bad on the plan. But going with others gave a little bit of support and a little bit of strength there as well. Now, how does God's presence in this story, God's presence is they carried the ark, right? That was, and we don't have that today. But how does God's presence for us help us? And I'm using the word battles here, but don't use this as like a fight necessarily, but just through any kind of challenge that we face. Okay. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. So you can look at past examples to draw strength from. Absolutely. Others? Uh-huh. So last one, or at least last question here. In what ways can consistent obedience in small things prepare us for success or spiritual victory in larger things? Uh-huh. But yeah, go ahead. But go ahead.
It's scary facing the lion and the bear, but then you got this big old huge giant ready to kill you.
All right.
Everybody else is trembling, but because of those, I hate to call them small, but they're pretty big lions.
Sure.
But because of those smaller victories, it gave him the courage to run out and meet the light with no fear, no hesitation whatsoever.
Absolutely. Others. We read this for a reason. And if you go back, you'll notice here that this first slide, Sue Ann read this, and they do all that they're supposed to do. But then the last thing right here, she said, so they did 6 days. So they did it every single day. And then in the 7th day, it tells you what all happened right there. And I think it's important to note that there were no shortcuts taken. And it would seem for us that after we did it the first day, it was kind of fun. And the second day, well, we'll see. But the third or fourth day, well, why don't we go walk all the way around town? What if we just eased over there to the corner and maybe come on back? That'd probably, cover it. Or let the girls go around the backside. You know what I'm saying? Like something like that. A shortcut can come up pretty quick. Mary. Right. Right. Sure. And we can see what Sue Ann read there just a minute ago. The 7th day required something different than the first 6, right? We would, to borrow Mary's, analogy right there, the 7th day was sort of like the game, right? That was when it became real. It wasn't practice anymore, and it required that from them. And so for us, she's exactly right. Ben, you're exactly right. The small things that we go through kind of boost our strength for the later, bigger things that we come across. It may not be perfect, but our past experience, Ben said he's never let it down before. That's going to help if something really bad happens tonight or next week or next month or next year, that you can be able to lean on. Any other thoughts on it before we move on? I don't want to take away comments from anybody. Y'all are all politely smiling at me and listening. I appreciate that. Well, no, we didn't. We addressed that at the beginning. So this is more of the story here. Joshua chapter 6, verses 20 through 27. This is actually the end of the chapter. Tom, do you care to read this one, sir?
shouted with a great shout that the wall fell in flat. The people went into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua had said to the two men who had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house, and you'll never bring out the woman and all that she had, as you swore to her. And the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. So they brought out all her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. But they burned the city and all that was in it with fire. Only the silver and gold, and the vessels of bronze and iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, her father's household, and all she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent out to find her. And Joshua charged them at that time, saying, cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds the city of Jericho. He shall lay its foundation with his firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set it escape. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all countries.
All right, so we kind of get to the finish line here, but they march around the city the seventh time. They do what they're supposed to do. It says they invade in, they destroyed everything they were told not to destroy, besides Rahab. We'll get that in a second. But what else were they told not to destroy? And earlier in the chapter, it said that would be added to the what? So that would be added to the treasury there. And then there's an example that we can have. There's a few examples of that where sometimes things were stolen in some other stories. We also saw that they used the gold to build the calf that Aaron said just jumped out of the fire. But there's a plan for the prize, if you would, that's going to take here. So I want us to think about this question. How do we balance, or how do we think about balancing God's justice and mercy? Because if you'll notice in this story, there are two things that happen, right? A lot of people get killed in this story. But Rahab doesn't, even though she is in the city. And for a lot of people who would have looked at this story and judged and said, well, she may be the worst person that's in the city, at least based on her profession. Okay. Right. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Pretty much took my answer right there from me, but y'all want it? Y'all can take it.
I think people get kind of tripped up a little bit on God's justice as far as destruction of the city and men, women, and children. But I took a thing on an interesting word study on this. When it talks about destroying the city, man, women, and children, it's not going in our slaying.
Right.
It's going in our conquering and putting them up. So, hey, God took the city. Now you have different things like that. It isn't that God was going in there and slaying innocent babies and stuff like that.
I think we see here that even in judgment here, there was a way for faithful to be saved, right? You know, she helped, But maybe other people could have helped, and there may have been other people that said, I don't know who those people are. The king shows up and says, we know they're here. So I'm guessing that people went around and said, hey, there's some strangers here that maybe, that are maybe shouldn't be here. But there was a route to salvation, right? There was a route that we could take to be able to get to salvation. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Uh-huh. And I think we see that with Jesus even, if you think about the people that Jesus, to borrow a term from today, hung around with, right? That was one of the sharper criticisms that Jesus would get, was that you hung around with these people that you're better than. You don't need to be with these people. And he would take those criticisms quite often. You can answer this question. You can think about it. We've asked it in some form seemingly every week when we've talked about it. But there are walls in our life that require faithful obedience before they can fall, right? I'm sure for some of us, we've had to march around the city more than once. We've had to take several laps around the city before the wall came down. And I'm not going to ask you to answer it, but there are things that every single one of you have had to go through in your life, right? And I would say that for most of us, when we're on that third or fourth lap, we've had thoughts that maybe I don't want to walk around in this city anymore. But faith allows us to keep going, right? And keep going. And eventually, we see from the Israelites, they eventually get around through it, right? And I'm sure that when it was over, there were some people in that group that were awful grateful that they kept on walking, right? Sure that there had to be people that were grateful that they were done that. But there's the old Chinese proverb that the trip of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? We talked about walking around cities there just a minute ago. Well, you'll never walk around the city if you don't ever take the first step, right? You got to take at least one, and then you got to take a second one, and then a third one, and then a fourth one, and you just keep on going. There it is. And for us, while some of the ways of God may seem unconventional, some of the teachings of the church may sometimes seem unconventional, at least by the way that me or you would have written the book if we had been in charge of it. Faith comes first, right? Faith is what we focus on the most. And so for us, I think the way that the people in this story had the ark with them, if we take God with us, then it may not work out the way we thought it was going to work out or the way that we would design it to work out, but it'll work out the way that God wants it to work out in his due time. If there's anything that we can do for you, any way that we can help you, whatever it is, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.
All to Jesus I surrender. All to him I free.